A son did everything a decent man was supposed to do. He saved the money. He secured the room. He kept the promise as long as he could. Then the system decided risk mattered more than that innocence. Welcome to In Chambers with the Reader's Court. I'm your host, Mark Bertrand, and this podcast is where we step inside the case beneath the case. Here's 002, the account that became a risk. What makes this case dangerous is not the freeze. The freeze is only the visible part. The deep wound is that Daniel Park is forced to carry the moral blame for something he did not cause. That is what readers can miss if they only read the event as financial trouble or procedural cruelty. The institution freezes the account. The institution creates the delay. The institution decides that caution towards itself matters more than proportion towards him. But Daniel is the only one who has to stand in front of his mother. Daniel's the one who has to answer the clock. Daniel's the one who has to absorb the look in her face when things begin to go wrong. And that is how power protects itself in modern systems. It pushes the pain downward until the person with the least authority becomes the one who appears responsible. And that matters because once you see it, the case stops being a story about money. It becomes a story about forced betrayal, not chosen betrayal, forced betrayal. Daniel did not fail because he was weak. He didn't fail because he was careless. He didn't fail because he misunderstood his obligations. He failed because an institution with more power than he has made a decision far above his life, then left him to deliver the consequences in person. That is one of the oldest arrangements in the world. Power acts at a distance. Ordinary people perform the damage up close. That is why the story puts us in the apartment and not in the compliance office at the bank. That's why the green sweater matters. That's why the missing earring matters. That's why the bag by the door matters. Because the real violence in this case is not digital. It's intimate. The machine doesn't have to look his mother in the eye. The machine doesn't have to tell her the trip has changed. The machine doesn't have to feel that small, unbearable moment when a decent person realizes that love and preparations are no longer enough to protect someone. Daniel has to do that. And once you understand that, the case becomes colder. Because the system like this do not merely deny access. They alter moral appearance. From the outside, it can begin to look as though Daniel failed to plan, as though Daniel waited too long, as though Daniel should have had more margin, more backup, more sophistication, more money, more foresight. And that's another hidden talent of institutional power and wealth. It makes the victim look underprepared for a very injury that the institution imposed on them. In other words, it injures first and lets ordinary social judgment finish the work for them. People say things like, you should always have a second account, you should have never kept all your money in one place, you should have anticipated this, you should have had a better plan. But that's the language of hindsight, spoken from safety. Most people do not live with 5 layers of insulation. Most people do not have enough excess capital to build elegant redundancies around every obligation. Most people are one interruption away from discovering that what looked like stability was really temporary access. This is the deeper fear inside the case. Not that money can be frozen, that your life may depend on forms of access you don't actually own. Daniel thinks it's his money. What he really has is permission to move it, permission to use it, permission to keep his promise on schedule. And the horror is that permission can be revoked faster than the human life can adapt. That is why this is a thriller case, not merely a social compliancy. Because thrillers are about power under pressure, about what gets exposed when time runs out, about who is allowed to act and who is left explaining. In case 002, the institution never has to explain itself in any morally complete sense. It only has to invoke a process. Daniel, meanwhile, has to live in the human dimension of the decision's immediacy. That is not an accident. That's all by design. And there's another thing buried inside the case that matters. His mother's condition intensifies the cruelty in a way that goes beyond sentiment. Memory loss changed the moral geometry. A person in her condition cannot fully track the real source of the harm. She cannot hold the system in view. She can't follow the chain from suspicious wire to compliance restriction to institutional fear. What she can experience is the delay, the confusion, the change of plans, the emotional disturbance, and the instability of the son trying not to let his face reveal the disaster. So the institution does not merely injure Daniel. It takes the shelter behind the fact that the most vulnerable person in the case cannot even clearly perceive the structure that it is harming. That is the brutal kind of symmetry. Power remains abstract, need remains personal. And abstract power nearly always wins that contest because it can afford to wait, while need cannot. That is the real force of the noon deadline. The deadline is not there just to create urgency. It reveals... Sorry, I got lost by the bird chirping. And it's springtime, what can you do? Anyway, the deadline is not there just to create urgency. It reveals which side understands time better. Daniel experiences time as disappearing opportunity. The institution experiences time as administrative space. He loses with every hour. It risks nothing in the delay. That is one of the most important truths in stories about systems. Delay is never neutral. When the powerful delay, they're often spending someone else's life and time. That's what Juniper House means in this case. Not merely a room, not merely elder care. A narrowing window in which decency can still take material form. Daniel's not fighting for convenience. He's fighting to keep his promise in a world before the world closes over the top of it. And the system answers with suspicion. So the deepest thing in this case is not that the bank treated him unfairly. It is that the system took a man trying to protect his mother and quietly repositioned him as the instrument of her disappointment. And that's what power did when it wants to remain clean. It did it always to crush you directly. Sometimes it arranges the situation so that you are the one left holding all the shame, and that is why the title got its name, and it's so cold. The account that became a risk. Because once the account becomes the thing the institution sees, the human being attached to it begins to disappear. Not all at once, not theoretically, just enough. Enough to delay, enough to deny, enough to let the son stand in a winter kitchen and understand that what is being taken from him is not merely access to money. It is the ability to do the decent thing in time. And think, and like so many cases brought before this court, the machine did not malfunction. It answered exactly as it was designed. Don't forget to file your verdict after reading the case. The stories are fiction. The systems are real. When power and privilege go unchecked, the reader's court asks the only question that matters. What is the right thing to do?